What's happening in today's youth ministry world? I've got a friend of mine talking exactly about that. Are you ready? Because it's time.
You're listening to the Church Digital Sidekick Podcast, part of the TCD Podcast Network.
Hey, heroes, my name is Tom Pounder, and this is the Church Digital Sidekick Podcast. This is the podcast where I bring on ministry leaders and we talk about how you can do ministry more effectively in this very digital and online world. And today I've got my friend Steve Cullum back on. Steve and I go way back to the time when we were blogging with Orange. But Steve is still very much involved with youth ministry. And today we talk about how you can do youth ministries today in this very digital and online world that we're living in. And because of this digital and online world, what can we be doing to minister to families as a whole? Steve talks about this, and I'm really excited for him to be sharing. But before we get into the interview, I want to highlight the Church Digital. If you go to thechurch.digital, that's the website, we've got tons of learning cohorts, we've got tons of coaches, we've got tons of podcasts and blogs, tons of resources for you in your digital and online ministry. If you're wondering what next steps of ministry you can be taking in digital and online ministry, the church.digital has all of that for you right at your computer website. So go to the church.digital today and find out all the different coaches, blogs, podcasts, and cohorts you can be a part of today. All right, heroes. Well, without any further ado, let's get into our conversation now with Steve Cullum and talk about youth ministry today. All right, with me right now is my friend Steve Cullum. Steve, how are you?
I'm doing pretty well. Yeah, it's been a crazy summer. Been kind of hopping over here and there and everywhere around the country, but we're doing well.
Yeah, where are you currently?
I am currently in Indianapolis. So I'm out here speaking for an organization called Mission Indy, and it's like a service-based camp that's they serve different organizations and churches and people in Indianapolis all week, and students come from all over. And so I'm speaking at the evening programs during this week.
That's awesome. Is there a central theme that you're talking about in your time?
Yeah, we're focusing a lot on the idea of run free. So from Hebrews chapter 12, and so kind of the central verses of all week has been Hebrews 12, 1 through 3, and kind of taking similar, the Olympics and things like that are happening this year, and kind of taking a jump off that.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Okay, well, while we can kind of go down the rabbit hole of what you're talking about and whatnot, let's first actually introduce you, because you've been on my podcast before. You and I have known each other for a number of years. So, but if there's anybody that is listening to it and they're like, "Who is Steve?" Hey, do a quick little intro, a little bio about who you are and what you do.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, I was actually thinking about that. It's been crazy how long we've known each other. But yeah, going back to blogging together at the Orange conference and stuff. But yeah, my name is Steve Cullum, and I've been in ministry since a volunteer since 1999. As a high school student, got started serving in kids ministry, and then eventually student ministry at my home church. And then went to Bible college and seminary to study youth ministry, and just kept on getting more and more and more involved. And now I currently live in Colorado, in Longmont, Colorado, and I serve as the Colorado State Coordinator for a national network of youth ministries, where I serve youth pastors basically around the state and some around the country, and we try to form networks of youth leaders around the state, and get them connected together for relationships and strategizing together and resourcing each other and things like that, but also doing some interpersonal work with those youth pastors as well, and maybe some pastoral counseling or some consulting, speaking engagements, things like that as well. And then I also do a little youth pastoring on the side as well, and I'm do a part-time youth pastor at a local church too. So I'm pretty busy lately.
Yes. Yeah. Well, again, like you said, we've known each other since back when we were blogging with Orange and doing a lot of stuff. And you've had a lot of different connections to a lot of different organizations over the years with youth ministry. And again, your heart is for youth, and your heart is to train and equip youth leaders now. How did you get involved with the organization that you're in right now?
Yeah, it all started probably when I was in Bible college. My youth ministry professor, he just let me know about this organization, and at the time I was in a Bible college town doing ministry around that, and there was just a lot of natural connections. But then I moved to New England, and that was not the case. And New England's a very different part of our country. Those they're listening that have lived there, they know. But it's not a very Christian part of our country, and so few and far churches, in between. And so I got there, and I realized I'm feeling alone in ministry. And then I remembered National Network and started using some of their resources to help me start some networks there in the area. And then one thing kind of basically led to another, and they saw that I was leading some networks in New Hampshire and said, "Hey, do you want to do some more leadership within the whole state?" And so I started doing that as a volunteer, and that led to me doing some stuff in all of New England. And then when I moved to Colorado, I just basically continued doing that. And then a year and a half ago, made that switch from doing it volunteer to now full time as a missionary. And so it's been a big transition of the last year and a half, but really exciting, and it's really cool to have more capacity to dedicate to this.
Yeah, that's awesome. And again, like what we talked about, you've been involved with youth ministry for a really long time. You've been blogging for a long time. You've been podcasting for a long time as well. And so it's really cool to see your heart and your passion for youth ministry. Whereas, I was in youth ministry for a long time too, but then I got out of it. And so while I still have kids who are my kids who are in that youth ministry age, I'm no longer involved. And
Mm.
I feel a good sense of relief right now. I'm like, okay, I'm good. I'm good with that right now. But you're still very much in the game, and so that's why I want to talk to you today. Is because I love youth ministry. You love youth ministry, but I'm kind of out of it now, and so I don't know what's working and what's not working, especially kind of this post-COVID time. So talk to me a little bit about what you've seen over the past few years of how youth ministry has changed and evolved, and some of the things that you're seeing right now.
Yeah, yeah, Tom. I think the the old adage that like as much as things change, they always stay the same. I think that's how the
Mm,
saying goes, and I think that very much applies to youth ministry. Um, Technology has changed. It has given this like my phone. I'm holding my phone like that. That is like passage into the entire world that teenagers have in the palm of their hands. And so all the anxiety and the stressors that come from all of that. And so students are dealing with more than they've ever have before.
mhm,
And all those things are changing. Students are like now on the other side of COVID, we're seeing students on the go more than they ever have before because we have back into everything, and all the things that were a part of their routines are not necessarily a part of the routines anymore. So church and youth group that was a part of their weekly thing is not as much anymore because it was
mm,
killed in a lot of ways during COVID. And so trying to get students back into that rhythm has been difficult. And just it's just constantly going all around us. But at the same time, I think the things that stay the same are our relationships are still
mm,
so important. I think maybe even more important than ever before because they're not getting them anywhere else. They're not getting them on their phones. They're not getting them in a lot of other places, and they're still longing for them like desperately. And so I think as youth leaders, like we've got to be able to navigate all of that. Like we got to be able
mhm,
to help the students walk through having phones in their pockets that they're able to be so connected with everything in the world. We're walking alongside parents who are freaking out because their kids are so connected and they're not prioritizing the things that they want them to prioritize. And then we have teenagers that are really struggling with life because they don't have deep relationships with God, and they don't have deep relationships with other people who really care for them as well. And so, yeah, that's a kind of a thirty
yeah,
thousand foot overview, but all that stuff's kind of going on at the same time.
yeah. So Again, one of the common themes, kind of post COVID was that the church attendance did decline, but it was really hard for me to kind of fully grasp about youth attendance. So you're saying that not only did church attendance decline, but even church attendance with like youth group or kind of those kind of ministries declined as well.
They did, not all over the place.
Yeah,
I saw increased attendance from mine after an initial decrease. So online
yeah,
attendance steadily decreased, like with a really sharp, as you're looking at the graph.
yeah,
But then once we started to meet back in person again, it was a very, very steady increase on the other side of things, and we actually saw our high school ministry triple in size and our middle school ministry double in
wow,
size after we came back from COVID. And and I would love to say that I did something amazing that caused that, Tom, but all I really did was I got out of the way. And I
yeah,
let God work. And we pared things down to just the basic things that we felt like really needed to happen. And we met in the park. We didn't have to be bound by a building. And we just said, okay, like, what are we going to do? We're going to get together. We're going to have teenagers together. We're going to feed them a little bit. We're going to worship, a couple songs of worship, and someone's going to share a testimony. And we're just going to have fun and build relationships with them. And it worked. And
yeah.
so we saw a lot of success with that, but that, unfortunately, from the conversations that I've had with a lot of other youth pastors, it is not the same across the board. I think a lot of them saw a lot of struggle. Attendance went down, and teenagers just didn't want to come back at all.
Yeah. Well, and again, you and I talked over COVID, and because you were doing something really cool with gaming
Hmm.
during the COVID time, where you were playing Jackbox games with people online, and again, Jackbox games are like so fun, and so, but you were really on the forefront of really trying to do new things during COVID and trying to really meet kids where they were at. But you're right. It wasn't surprising. Like when we first started doing youth ministry during COVID, attendance was really high. But then kids quickly went down. But what I love about what you just said was that when you were getting back together, you kind of just really pared things down. And I think it's kind of one of those things. I think sometimes we overcomplicate things and we overdo it, and we're like, we have to have this thing, we have to this program, that program, this program. And what I just heard you say is that you really focus on the relationships. You're like, hey, we want to get people back together, back
Hmm.
hanging out together, and letting God work in that way.
Yeah, yeah, and and in a world where I think we have shifted it so hard, like you said, like focusing so much on the programs and making it big and make it flashy and give things away and all these different things that attract teenagers to a church. Like I don't know if it's working as much as it used to,
Yeah.
and at least in my what I'm seeing, it's not working that well, and it's not working in the way that we really want it to. But what's really going to keep students coming back and also inviting their friends to come back is the relationship side of things, and then also making sure that we are equipping students well to actually take their faith with them. I think it is totally different because for a long time we as youth leaders have was said, oh yeah, bring your students to us and we will tell them about Jesus. I mean, we may not have actually said
Mm-hmm.
that, but that's kind of what we were acting like. And what it
Mm-hmm.
was really needs to be about is giving our students the equipping and the empowering to take their faith to their schools and take their faith to their phones and take their faith to their social media and take their faith wherever they end up going. And if we're equipping
Mm-hmm.
our students to do that, it's going to be exciting for them and they're going to want their friends to be a part of that because this church is actually doing something that matters rather than just throwing a big party and giving away an iPhone or something. So,
Yeah. No, listen, man, I agree with you 100%. All throughout my youth ministry career, I've never been a part of a big church or a mega church kind of thing. I was always in the small and medium sized churches, but I always had a good program. And I think it kind of goes along with what you were just talking about, how we focus on the relationships and that kids wanted to come back to group, not because we were giving away iPhones, or actually when I started, and you and I both started, we didn't have iPhones. That's how
Right.
old you and I are. But the reality is that we focus on the relationships and the connection to have one another. And it's funny, Steve, and I'm sure you have relationships like this as well, is that I'm still in contact with probably like 20 to 30 people still from back in the early 2000s when I had youth ministry at this one church. And we were still staying in contact because the relationship bond that we built was so much bigger than anything that was we gave away or anything that we did or put on at our church, because it was all about the relationships, and these kids
Yep.
built bonds with each other and with Christ. And that
Mhm.
really leaves a lasting impact.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think it was during my internship, and it was back when like the worship wars and all that stuff were happening, and it just hit me one day. I'm like, you know what? Like, I don't, and I'm not patting myself on the back. I've got my own flaws, but this is one of the things that I just kind of made sense to me. That was like, I don't know if it really matters what type of music a church does. What's really going to keep a person coming back is the relationships that they make while they're there. Um, and we see that, like, even a bunch of, like, I've heard from other churches that they have old people that come to their church, and which is awesome, and they're like, oh man, I don't care for this music, but I'm here because the kids are here, or it's other reasons why people keep coming back to a church. It's not because of the programs we do, or even a great preacher or whatever it is. It's because someone actually wants them there, and they feel valued when they walk in the door, and they want to be a part of that, and they want their friends to be a part of that.
Yeah. Dude, that's awesome. This is so encouraging and refreshing to hear too, because again, it really comes down to, like, listen, no matter how much technology we have at our fingertips, and no matter what we can do, it still stays the same. We got to focus on relationships. So as we're moving into, again, continue to do youth ministry, how are you encouraging youth ministers right now, other than the relationship aspect? What are some of the things that you feel? Because one of the things I'm seeing too is that, it took us a while to hire my replacement.
Mm.
When I got out of youth ministry, it took a while. There weren't as many youth people wanting to go into youth ministry. So are you seeing that as well? And then how are you encouraging to try to get more youth ministers, especially where you're at?
Yeah, we're definitely seeing that. I mean, it's across the board. I feel like there's less and less people going into ministry in general, but yeah, we're seeing that within the youth ministry world, and sadly enough, like my Bible college closed a couple weeks ago. They had their final graduation, and it was sad to see that happen, and we're seeing that happen across the board as well, and less people are even considering ministry. So we could talk about all the reasons why that's the
Yeah.
case, probably on a completely different episode, because I've got some theories. But I think what we need to do as a church, and what we're trying to do from my standpoint at National Network, is come alongside those churches that do have someone that is in that place. And the vast majority of youth leaders has been like this forever, but it's increasing, are either volunteer or part-time. And they're the people that are just willingly giving of their time, but they don't always have the education or the equipping or anything like that to do the youth ministry. They just love Jesus and they're available, and they got placed in this position. And so coming alongside them and helping the ones that are already there, the volunteers that are there, the part-time leaders that are trying to keep it afloat, but then also trying to come alongside churches and saying, who in your youth group or who in your young adults are probably being called to ministry, that you need to call that out of them. Because I think a lot of times in churches, like we back in the 80s and 90s and maybe even early 2000s, we were calling students to ministry a lot, and it was awesome. And I think we saw that boom because of that. But then we've stopped, and we're not doing student leadership nearly as much. We're not training the next generation of leaders nearly as much. And a lot of times we did ship them off. They're like, oh, you think you're interested in ministry? We'll go to a Bible college, which is great. but what are we doing within the church itself to raise up the next generation of leaders and giving them opportunities within our youth groups and within our children's ministries and within our worship ministries and all these different things to explore ministry, to get some good experience doing it, some people coming alongside of them, helping them hone their skills even at a young age, and then setting them up for the calling that God has placed on them. So I think all those things need to happen in order to fix what we're seeing within the pipeline of a dying era right now.
Yeah, I think you're right. Because again, like you said, fewer and fewer people are actually going into ministry and as a whole. But I also think that like youth ministry, the entry point into youth ministry is so low. Like you don't have to have an MDiv or anything like that to get involved with youth ministry. In fact, I went to a Christian college and got a Christian education degree. But I know so many people that I went in a training group with that had no degree whatsoever in any kind of religious stuff. And so the entry point in there is so low. And I think you're right. It's like we need to be calling people to ministry. And are we doing that? And I actually, when you were talking about this, I actually felt guilty. And I'm like, when was the last time I said to someone, dude, you need to consider doing ministry?
Mm.
I'm talking to them about doing other things like, oh, here, use your gift to do this. And God is going to use their gift one way or another. But are we actually calling people into ministry? That's actually a really great observation, Steve, that I didn't even really think about.
Yeah, and I think it's important for us to think broadly as well. I mean, thinking even digitally, like helping people understand, like if they love being online and we have students that really desire to be influencers. That's like one of the number one career goals now, of teenagers. And so helping them understand maybe that could be a place where you could do ministry as well. And it doesn't have to be a traditional like youth pastor, preacher, children's pastor roles or whatever. There's other ways to do ministry as well. And so when we're calling them into that, helping them kind of understand that the world of ministry is so broad, and how might God actually use you in all these different areas, especially in our modern world.
Okay, so as we're talking about youth ministry and youth ministry today, what are some of the other than the fact of ministry leaders not being as available in there, what are some other challenges that you are seeing right now with youth ministry in general that we are trying to overcome, or that you're working with your group and with your church to kind of overcome?
Yeah, I think it, unfortunately, I alluded to it earlier. I think the anxiety levels and the suicidal ideation and stuff that we're facing within the modern world is just increasing over and over and over again. And in Colorado, we're like, so suicide is the number two killer of teenagers around the country. In Colorado, it's number one.
Mhm.
And so that's a serious thing that I think we as the church need to take note of and figure out what are we going to do in order to combat that and try to do some things that can change those statistics. And so and unfortunately, I think one of the leading causes of why we are where we are is because of technology in some ways, because they're just overwhelmed by everything that is at their fingertips and everything that's in the world that's going through all the trouble and struggles and everything. We've got middle schoolers that are really concerned about the presidential election and what's going on there. When I was in middle school, I didn't care. I couldn't care less about what was going on in the presidential election, let alone how it affected me and how it affected my family and all these different things. But this is something they're seriously concerned about, and whether that's right or wrong, that's the world we live in nowadays. And so being able to, number one, get some really really good education around those youth leaders, those volunteers that are able to come alongside the students, but also their families, and pastorally counsel them through all these different things that are going on in our world, but also to be able to provide some really serious like mental health professionals that are able to really step into that stuff. And we don't have enough. Like, I feel like
Mhm.
I talk to youth leaders all the time, and they're like, I keep referring, but we're also lacking good counselors that I can
Mhm.
send teenagers to. And I've had, a couple parents that are saying, you recommended a great counselor, but they're 6 months out. Like, I can't get in and faster than 6 months. And so I think that's probably the biggest issue that I'm really seeing, that is just continuing to kind of, I don't know, spiral and snowball. I think is the mental health issues and suicide and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's really unfortunate because again, all the stats are showing exactly what you're saying. And the one of the encouraging things I've been seeing, at least in my area, is that our school systems are now starting to take a little bit more of a serious approach to it, where there are a few bills going on. I live in Virginia, few bills going on in some of the counties about next year tightening the range of phones in their school, so where they
Mm,
can't use their phones. And at one point, I'm like, "Oh, what's the big deal?" But the reality is, it's so time consuming to them. Like
mm,
they get a text message notification, they got to respond to it. Again, as a parent, when I text my kid during school, I text my kid during school, and they don't need to be distracted in that way. And so, for school systems to start taking an interest in this and really seeing the seriousness of it is really
mm,
important. But there's also a family issue of it too, where families need to really kind of work on this as well. It's family by family, but I think as youth ministers, one of the best things I did in youth ministry, like I could not get, if anytime I said, "Hey, we're gonna have a parents meeting at the church," I would get hardly anybody attend those meetings. However, I did social media meetings where
mm.
I brought in an expert and they talked about social media and the dangers of social media and kind of equipping parents. I got the attendance was out of the park.
Yeah.
I mean, it was so amazing because parents are interested in this. They want to know how to do this. Are you
Yep.
seeing stuff like that as well?
Absolutely. Yeah. Like, and it's funny because now we're having parents that are, like older millennials to, I mean, any millennial now, and even older Gen Z are now having kids, and all of a sudden, like, those parents who grew up with technology, like, they're still freaking out because they don't know what's going on, because it's just constantly changing, and they have to constantly keep up. And so, yeah, I think any time we can help parents with, especially technology, how to navigate all of that, how to not only like figure out what are these words that my kids are using, and they
Yeah.
probably all came from something online that triggered some new trend that they're all jumping on. And so figuring out what language my kids are using, but also what are these apps that they are asking for, and which ones are safe and which ones are not safe, and which ones do I have to look out for, and what kind of boundaries do I have to put up, and what kind of parameters can I put on their phone, and how do I keep them from overdoing the parameters that I put on there, and all those different things are very real. And I think parents are realizing that it's a scary world out there, but at the same time, like, their phones are very valuable, and it's great because you can get a hold of your kid in school sometimes when you want to, and years ago we weren't able to do that. So there's pros and cons, there's conveniences, but also it's a very, very scary tool that we're putting in the hands of teenagers, and parents are freaking out. But yeah, they're jumping on any chance they can get to learn more about it. And I'm thankful for some resources out there that are really helpful, for parents that are looking to learn more.
Yeah. It's so funny because as a young when my kids were younger, I was like, oh, I'm the cool hip guy. I know all these kind of things. I'm in the youth ministry. I know all this stuff. But as I've gotten older and older, my kids are talking about things. I'm like, what the heck is this? Like, I feel like the old fogey now, even though my brain, I feel like I'm still like 21 years old. My body, I'm 49, and it's like, oh my gosh, I don't know what my kids are talking about. I have no idea. And that's why, again, the key thing of educating our parents, parents want to know this stuff. I want to know this stuff. Parents and so they will respond. If you do a social media night or an online ministry night, they're going to respond to that. So,
Yeah.
okay, Steve. So I'm hearing that relationships still matter, and it's still the driving force of what's going to draw people to ministry. Don't worry about all the hubbub around it. Just focus on relationships. About calling people, focus on student leadership, and also calling people into ministry. Also helping and training and equip parents. These are some of the things that we've been talking about doing youth ministry in today's world. As we kind of wrap up a little bit, what else? How else would you encourage people in youth ministry right now, or what you're seeing that would be helpful?
Yeah, I think the other thing that really hits home to me, and it really is what I get to do nowadays, is help connect youth leaders with other youth leaders. Because even though we talk about these teenagers who are feeling disconnected nowadays, the truth is that we're also feeling disconnected. Like we are able to have, conversations like this online, and technology allows us to keep in touch and text with all these different people. But when, like, I hope that the youth leaders that are listening, or people that are listening that know youth leaders, I hope they have friends in ministry. I hope they have people they can actually connect with and talk about the good stuff that God's doing in their ministry, but also talk about the hard times, because ministry's hard sometimes, because we deal with people and people are broken, and sometimes that's difficult, and we need places where we can go and sometimes just unload and pray with each other. We need people to we can go to strategize with other youth leaders and say, how can we actually reach the teenagers in our community? How can we come together as the overall church and not just our individual, kingdoms, and say, these are the teenagers that God has entrusted to all of us. How can we reach them together, and how can we resource each other, and all that stuff? And if you're doing ministry alone, dare I say, you're doing it wrong. We were never meant to do it alone. And if you feel alone in ministry, it's time to change it, because if you're going to stick with it for the long haul, and we need you for the long haul, people are dropping off like crazy. But if you're going to stick with it for the long haul, you need to connect with other people and network with other people and build those relationships. And so that's like the biggest thing that I'm all about nowadays.
Yeah, talk about your network real quick. Give people an idea about how they could get involved with that.
Yeah, so it's nnym.org, so National Network of Youth Ministries. And we've existed for quite a while, since the early 80s. And our desire is to get networks started around the country. And so we like to say we don't own networking, we just champion networking. So if there's an existing network that already exists in a local community, great. We will champion in it. How can we resource them? How can we help them get better, and really help that network thrive? Because we want those youth leaders to thrive. But if there's not a network in your area, we want to help get one started. And again, everything's free. We don't charge for anything. We just want youth leaders to be healthy and thriving, so that you can be the best leader you can be for those students in your community. And so, yeah, the best way to reach out to the network is nnym.org. And on there, you're going to be able to find a map that you just see like what networks already exist in your community. And if you don't find one, there's a button that says start a network, and that'll put you in contact with us. And we will able to get that started, and walk you through that whole process, and be able to resource you and support you through it.
Yeah, dude, that's great. And I know that when I first started doing youth ministry, I was a part of a network, not that network, but I was a part of a network, and it was so helpful, because while you're going into ministry, like you said, you feel like you're in it alone, but you're not in it alone. Other people are going through the same things you're experiencing, and it's always great encouragement to have someone that you can talk to who kind of gets you and understands you. And so being a part of that network is great. So if you don't have one, definitely I'll include the link in the show notes. You can do that. And I would encourage you highly to get involved with that. Again, it also helps with burnout. Like, we've seen burnout all over the ministry board, and to be a part of a network, I really think helps prevent burnout, because you realize
Absolutely.
you're not in it alone, and you go down this dark path. No, there's other people like you, and they're going to encourage you as well. Steve, as we kind of wrap up here, how would someone connect with you specifically? I know you talk about your blog and your podcast, and also how they can connect with you.
Sure. Yeah. So probably the easiest way is my website, my blog. So it's stevecullum.com, stevecullum.com. And yeah, you can find my ministry blog over there. So in the archives, you'll see years and years of orange blogs that are there. But then also just different things about mostly youth ministry. A lot of times what I'm doing now is I'm trying to write a lot more about what I'm doing around the country and around Colorado with the national network and different opportunities that God's given me and things that I'm learning and picking up from different youth ministries around the country, and just kind of sharing those out with everybody. And that's basically what I do with my podcast as well. And I've been running that since 2019. 2016 is when that started. And so I bring on other youth leaders and we talk about what is important around ministry. And that's called Student Ministry Connection. And you can find that on studentministryconnection.com, but also on my site and on all podcast platforms and everything out there as well. But it'd be great to see you on either the blog or the podcast.
Yeah, you've got great stuff. I love reading your blogs and I like listening to your interviews. So you do a great job. Well, Steve, thanks so much for being with me. As always, it was really great talking to you.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
All right, so what did you think of the conversation? What stood out to you? We talked about some really key things, and I loved, honestly, how the relationship aspect is the key thing. Even with all the digital tools that we have, and I love those digital tools, relationships is the most important. You can use the digital tools to further enhance those relationships, but again, that face-to-face, one-on-one relationships, those are the things that draw kids back and get them involved. So what stood out to you? What encouraged you? What challenged you? What are you going to do differently today based on the conversation Steve and I have? Definitely put it in the comment section below or hit me up on Twitter. Actually, you can hit Steve and I both up on Twitter. We'd love to carry this conversation on a little bit more because youth ministry, while I'm not in it, Steve's still in it, but we both have a heart for youth ministry and we both have a heart for youth ministers. So hit us up. Let's carry this conversation on a little bit further so we can all grow closer to Christ, and also we can be encouraging youth ministries and youth ministers and teenagers together. All right, heroes. Well, thank you so much for being with me today. As always, if you enjoyed the podcast, definitely subscribe to it. It's on YouTube. It's on Facebook. It's on all the different platforms to get your podcast on. So definitely hit on the show notes to be a part of the platform that you love and subscribe to it. It'd be great. All right, heroes. Well, I hope you have a great rest of your day, a great rest of your week. And until next time, have a great one.